The first thing I lost was the weight. Not the crown, I had left that on its velvet stand in the long hall. Not the cloak, though I folded it and locked it in the iron chest beside my father's sword. What I lost, the moment I stepped onto the mud track below the northern gate, was the weight that every living soul in Greymark pressed onto my shoulders simply by expecting me to be their king. The wool I wore was common, a shepherd's cast-off, traded from a stable hand who believed I was a courier running debts. It smelled of lanolin and smoke and someone else's life, and I pulled it around my throat and walked. My beta Tauren had stood at the gate with his arms folded and his jaw tight. 3 weeks, I had told him. If I am not back, send the Outriders. And when they find you dead in a ditch, then you'll finally get the throne you've been circling. He had not laughed. Tauren never did when he was frightened for me. I had ruled Greymark for 11 years. My father, Aldrich Ashvin, died the winter I turned 22, and the council placed the iron circlet on my head before his pyre had cooled. 11 years, no wars lost, no borders broken, and no mate. They had brought them to me in a long, glittering parade, daughters of northern lords, sisters of allied alphas, widows of southern kingdoms who came wrapped in fur and ambition and smelled, every one of them, of strategy. My wolf had not stirred for any of them, not a twitch, not a flicker. Perhaps your wolf is dead, Lord Cavan had murmured at the last council meeting when I had refused the 20th candidate. The room had gone cold. I did not kill him, though I wanted to. I told him to leave and not come back until he could address his king without venom. But his words had burrowed in. Perhaps my wolf was dead. Perhaps the bond, the fated pull, the thing every ballad and every elder promised would strike like lightning when the right soul stood before you, was a story for younger men. Perhaps I was meant to rule alone, and the kingdom would pass to Tauren's line, and that would be enough. It was not enough. I knew it the way you know hunger, not in the mind but in the body, a hollowness behind the ribs that no feast filled. So I decided to walk. Not as a king. Not as an alpha, as no one at all. I smeared ash and clay across the left side of my face, thick enough to pass for a burned scar that had healed badly. I bound my hands in linen strips, the way a man might who had worked a forge fire and lost. I did not bathe for 2 days before I left. By the time I stepped through the northern gate, I smelled like livestock and wood smoke and poverty, and the guard on duty did not look twice. The first village was Cairnmouth, 4 hours south along the coastal road. 30 families, a tavern, a smithy, a chapel to the old wolves. I arrived at dusk, limping. The limp was real by then, my boots cheap and my feet already blistered, and knocked on the tavern door. The man who opened it looked at my face, at the scar, at the linen on my hands. "Full," he said. "I can pay a little." Full, the door shut. I knocked at the house beside it. A woman peered through the shuttered window. I asked for water. She pointed down the road. At the smithy, the blacksmith, a broad, red-faced man whose name I later learned was Gedda, told me to move along before I frightened his apprentice. "We've had trouble with drifters," he said, as if that explained the cruelty. Perhaps it did. I slept that night in a hay barn at the edge of Cairnmouth, with the door cracked open so I could watch the stars. My wolf was quiet inside me, not dead, just waiting, the way a hunter waits when the wind has not yet brought the scent. I walked for 6 days. I will not recount every village, every slammed door, every averted gaze. I will tell you what I learned. That Greymark, my kingdom, the land I had bled to hold and fed through 2 famines, did not have a generous bone for a scarred stranger. Not because they were evil. They were tired. They were afraid. The coast had been hard that year, storms, poor catches, a blight on the barley, and when people are tired and afraid, they see a stranger not as a soul but as a mouth. One more mouth when there are already too many. I understood it, I hated it. I knocked on perhaps 40 doors in 6 days. I was given water twice, both times by old women who did not open their doors wide enough for me to see their faces. I was given bread once, by a boy of perhaps 10 who tossed it to me from a window and then ducked back inside as if he had committed a crime. It was stale. I ate it so fast I nearly choked. By the 7th day, I had reached the far western edge of my own territory, the cliffside hamlets above the Ashenmere, where the land dropped away to see stacks and spray and the wind never stopped. There were perhaps 12 cottages strung along the cliff path, half of them shuttered for the season. Fishing families, menders, salt workers. The kind of people my council never thought about. I was not well. I will be honest about this because the story means nothing if I am not. 6 days of walking on blistered feet, sleeping rough, eating almost nothing. My body, trained as it was, had limits. The ashen clay scar had cracked and peeled, and beneath it a real wound had opened where I had scratched in my sleep. My left knee had swollen. My hands beneath the linen wraps were raw, and my wolf, deep inside, had begun to pace, not with danger but with a restlessness I could not name, as if he were listening for something just beyond the edge of hearing. I knocked on the first cliff cottage. No answer. The second. A man told me to try the chapel. The third was empty. The fourth, a woman closed her window when she saw my face. The 5th cottage sat at the very end of the path, where the cliff curved and the wind came off the water like a hand trying to push you back to the mainland. It was small stone walls, a driftwood door, a roof patched with sailcloth in 3 places. Smoke came from the chimney. There were nets hung along the south wall, drying, and beside them a wooden frame where someone had stretched a fishing line and was mending it with patient, even knots. I did not knock. I could not. My left knee buckled on the last step and I went down on the stone threshold like a sack of grain, and the world tilted and I thought, this is where the king of Greymark dies. On a stranger's doorstep, dressed in a shepherd's wool, with ash on his face and no name. I heard the door open. I heard a voice, low, steady, not frightened. Don't try to stand. Let me look at you. Hands, small, calloused, warm even in the sea wind. They turned my face, found the wound beneath the cracked ash and drew a breath. Not a gasp. A measured breath. The kind a person takes when they are deciding what to do and have already decided to do it. Can you put your arm over my shoulder? I tried to speak. My throat was sand. Don't talk, just lean. I leaned. She pulled me upright. She was strong for her size, wiry, the strength that comes from hauling nets and splitting driftwood, and half carried me through the door. The cottage was 1 room. A hearth, a table, a straw pallet, a shelf of mending supplies, thread, needles, patches of canvas and wool. It smelled of salt and dried herbs and the faint sweetness of oatcakes. She lowered me onto the pallet, which was hers. There was no other, and went to the hearth. I watched her through half-closed eyes. She was not young in the way the council's candidates had been young, polished, arranged, adorned. She was young in the way the coast was young after a storm, stripped clean, honest, every line earned. Dark hair tied back with a cord. A face that did not try to be anything other than what it was. Steady, open, a little weathered. Hands that moved with the certainty of someone who had been alone long enough to trust no one's hands but her own. She came back with a bowl. It was stew, potatoes, salt fish, a few strands of seaweed, a heel of bread soaking at the bottom. She held it to my mouth. Drink the broth first, slowly. This is your meal, I said. I can see that you haven't eaten in days. Drink. I drank. The broth was thin, seasoned with nothing but salt and a sprig of something green I couldn't name, and it was the finest thing I had ever tasted. Not because of the flavor, because of the hand that held the bowl steady while a stranger drank. She let me finish it, every drop. Then she went to the shelf and came back with a damp cloth and a pot of something that smelled of yarrow. The wound on your face is infected. I need to clean it. It will hurt. I've had worse. Everyone says that. She cleaned it anyway, and she was right, it hurt. But her hands were precise, and she did not apologize for the pain, and she did not flinch from the ugliness of the wound. She simply worked. "What's your name?" I asked. "Myra." A pause. "Myra Lochran." "Myra," I tested it. It sat in my mouth like a word I had always known. I almost said it, the name, the title, the whole ruin of honesty I had built. I caught myself. Wren. Wren. She did not ask for more. She wrapped the wound in clean linen, checked the swelling on my knee, and laid a folded blanket over me. "Sleep. I'll be here." She slept on the floor beside the hearth, wrapped in a coat that had been mended so many times it was more patch than original cloth. I lay on her pallet, her only bed, given to a man she had never seen before, and stared at the low ceiling. And for the first time in months, my wolf was quiet. Not pacing, not waiting, just settled, like a creature who has found the place it was looking for and sees no reason to move. I slept deeper than I had in years. I woke to the sound of her singing. Not loudly, not for anyone. She was at the table, mending a net by the pale gray light of the cliffside morning, and the song was more hum than melody, something old and half-remembered that rose and fell with the rhythm of her hands pulling thread through rope. I lay still and listened, and the warmth behind my ribs, the one I had felt the night before when she held the bowl to my mouth, spread slow and certain, like a tide coming in over flat sand. I knew what it was. I had waited 11 years, and I knew. Not because my wolf surged or howled or did any of the dramatic things the ballads promise. He simply opened his eyes inside me, looked toward her, and lay back down. "There," the gesture said. "There. That's the one. Why are you still lying down?" I was still lying down because my knee was the size of a turnip, and my face was bandaged, and I was wearing a dead shepherd's wool, and I smelled like a barn. This was not how a king meets his fated mate. This was not how any of the stories go. But the bond does not care about stories. The bond is older than stories. It is the thing the stories try to describe and never quite catch. The recognition, deep in the blood, that this soul is the soul that answers yours, and you have been walking toward her your whole life even when you did not know it. I sat up. Myra looked over. "Your color is better. Can you eat?" She made oatcakes, too. She gave me both. I watched her not eat, and the warmth behind my ribs turned sharp. "You haven't eaten." "I'll eat later." "Myra." "I have stores." She did not. I could see the shelf. There was a bag of oats nearly empty, a twist of salt, a few dried fish hanging from a hook, enough for one person for perhaps 3 days, and she had given a stranger her supper and her breakfast without a second thought. "Why?" I asked. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw something other than steadiness in her face. A flicker of something soft, almost confused, as if the question itself were strange. "Because you were at my door," she said. That was all, because you were at my door. I stayed. I told myself it was the knee. It was swollen, truly, and walking on it would have been foolish. I told myself it was the wound on my face, which Myra cleaned and dressed twice a day with the yarrow paste and a gentleness that made my chest ache. I told myself it was strategy. I was testing the kingdom's heart, and I had found one worth studying. I was lying. I stayed because I could not leave her. The days took on a shape. She rose before dawn, went to the cliff's edge to check the crab traps she had set in the rocks below, a scramble down a narrow path that made my stomach clench to watch, and came back with whatever the sea had given. Sometimes a crab, sometimes nothing. She mended nets for the fishing families in the hamlet, and they paid her in scraps, a heel of bread, a measure of salt, once a bundle of candles that she received as if it were gold. She was not liked. I learned this gradually, the way you learn the shape of a reef by watching where the water breaks. The fishing families tolerated Myra Lochran. They brought her their torn nets because she was the best mender on the coast, and her stitches held in storms that shredded everyone else's work. But they did not invite her to their tables. They did not knock on her door. The children had a rhyme, I heard it once, carried on the wind, a snatch of sing-song cruelty about the cliff woman who talked to the sea. "They think I'm strange," Myra said one evening when I asked. She was mending my boot, a task I had not requested, which she had simply begun as if it were obvious that a man with blistered feet needed better shoes. "I came here 5 years ago. I had nothing. No family, no pack. I'm not from any of the registered bloodlines. In Greymark, that makes you nobody." And nobody bothered to look closer. She smiled. It was a small smile tucked into the corner of her mouth, and it did not reach for pity. "I have a roof. I have work. The sea feeds me when the traps are kind. It's enough." It was not enough. I knew it the way I had known my own loneliness in the long haul, by the absence of complaint. People who have truly accepted their solitude do not need to say it's enough. It is only the ones who are still hungry who say it, to keep the hunger from eating them alive. On the third day I was well enough to stand. I helped her haul the nets from the south wall, where the wind had tangled them, and rehang them. My hands were clumsy, the linen wraps were still on, and I was playing a part, a man with forge-burned hands who could not grip well, and Myra adjusted the wrap without being asked, tightening it so I could hold the rope. "You don't have forge hands," she said quietly. I went still. "The calluses are wrong. Forge scars are on the palms and the inner fingers. Yours are on the outer edge below the knuckle." She looked at me, and there was no accusation in her gaze, only clarity. "Sword calluses. You've held a blade most of your life." "Myra, I'm not asking. Whatever you're running from or toward, it's your business. I only mention it because if your hands need different care, I should know." She went back to the nets. I stood there in the salt wind, holding a rope, and felt the bond pull so hard I nearly told her everything. My name, my title, the reason I was walking my own kingdom in rags, the fact that I had knocked on 40 doors and hers was the only one that opened, the fact that my wolf, who had not stirred for 20 daughters of lords, had lain down in peace the moment her hands touched my face. I did not tell her, not yet, because I needed to know that what I was feeling was not gratitude, not loneliness, not the desperation of a king who had been told his wolf might be dead. I needed to know it was real. I stayed a 4th day, a 5th, a 6th. On the 4th day, I watched her give her last dried fish to old Widow Surith, who lived 2 cottages down and whose own stores had run out. Myra wrapped it in a cloth and walked it over, and when Widow Surith protested, "Girl, you'll starve yourself," Myra said, "I'll set the traps deeper tomorrow. The sea always gives." She came back with nothing and made broth from salt and seaweed, and we shared it, and she did not mention the fish. On the 5th day, a stray cat appeared at the door, thin, one ear torn, fur matted with salt. Myra let it in without a word, as if she had been expecting it. She gave it a scrap of oatcake soaked in broth. The cat ate and then climbed into her lap and slept, and Myra mended nets around it for an hour, never shifting, never disturbing the animal's rest. "You do this often," I said, "take in strays." She looked at me over the sleeping cat, and the corner of her mouth twitched. "You're one to talk." I laughed. I could not help it. It was the first real laugh I had managed in I could not remember how long. On the 6th day, I walked with her down the cliff path to the crab traps. The path was narrow, cut into the rock, slick with spray. She moved on it like a creature born to the stone, sure-footed, unhesitating, her body reading the rock the way my wolf read the forest. I followed, less gracefully, and when my bad knee buckled on a wet ledge, her hand shot out and caught my arm and held me steady. Her fingers on my wrist. The warmth behind my ribs flared not like fire, not like the dramatic conflagration the ballads describe. Like sun breaking through fog. Slow, total, undeniable. My wolf opened his eyes and looked through mine, and for one breath I saw her the way he saw her, not a mender, not a cliff woman, not a nobody. A soul so steady and so generous that the world had simply failed to deserve her. Myra's hand tightened. She felt it too. I saw it in the way her breath caught, the way her pupils widened, the faint tremor in her fingers before she pulled them back. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yes." She searched my face. Whatever she saw there she did not name. She turned and continued down the path, and I followed, and neither of us spoke about the moment on the ledge. But that night, when she sat by the hearth mending a coat for one of the fishing families, she kept glancing at me. Quick looks, turned away before I could meet them. And once, when she thought I was asleep, she whispered something to the stray cat in her lap, so quietly that only a wolf's hearing could have caught it. "He's going to leave, you know. They always leave." The ache in her voice was old, practiced. It was not self-pity. Myra did not traffic in self-pity. It was the bone-deep knowledge of a woman who had learned through repetition that no one stayed. I closed my eyes and made a vow in the dark. Not to the moon, not to the old wolves, not to the kingdom. To her. I am not leaving. On the 7th day, the trouble came. I should have expected it. Torin was a loyal beta and a worrier, and I had told him 3 weeks, but I had also vanished without a trail. By the 7th day, the outriders would have fanned across the kingdom. And in a hamlet this small, a stranger's presence was noticed. I was outside, splitting driftwood, my knee was better, and I had insisted on earning my keep when I heard the hooves. 3 riders coming up the cliff path at a canter, and even before I saw the gray cloaks and the iron badges I knew. Greymark Outriders, my own. The lead rider was a young woman named Dissa, one of Torin's best scouts. She reined up in the hamlet's central path and swept the cottages with a sharp gaze. "We're looking for a man," she called out. "A stranger, scarred face, linen-wrapped hands, may have arrived in the last week." The cottage doors opened. Faces appeared, the same faces that had not opened their doors for a scarred stranger 7 days ago. And now, with the king's own outriders asking, every one of them pointed. "The cliff woman's got him," said Gedda, the blacksmith's cousin who had settled here after Cairnmouth. "Took him in, she did, that odd Lochran girl." Dissa turned her horse toward Myra's cottage. I dropped the axe and walked to meet her. There was no point in running. There was no reason to. Dissa saw me from 20 paces. She knew my face, scar or no scar, ash or no ash. She had trained under my eye for 2 years. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "My lord." "Dissa." She dismounted. The other 2 riders dismounted. All 3 knelt in the mud of the cliff path, and every person in the hamlet who had come to their door to point saw a scarred stranger in a shepherd's coat receive the obeisance of the king's own guard. The silence that followed was enormous. Myra came to the door. I turned to look at her, this woman who had taken in a nameless, faceless, scarred nobody and given him her bed, her food, her yarrow paste, her steady hands, her company, her quiet singing in the morning, and I saw the understanding arrive in her face. Not anger, not the bitterness of betrayal. A slow, careful settling like a stone dropped into deep water, the ripples moving outward, rearranging everything. "Ren," she said. "Soren," I corrected, "Soren Ashving. Alpha King of Greymark." She looked at the kneeling outriders. She looked at the hamlet's watching faces. She looked at me. "I gave the King of Greymark my last oatcake," she said. It was such an absurdly practical thing to say that Dissa, still kneeling, let out a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. I crossed the distance between us in 3 strides, and I did not touch her because I had not asked, and because the bond does not give you the right to touch. It gives you the longing, and the longing must be answered by consent. "Myra, you lied to me." "Yes." "The whole time." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. The wind came off the sea and pressed her hair against her cheek, and I wanted to brush it back, and I did not. "Why?" she asked. I told her. All of it, the council's candidates, the 20 daughters of lords, the hollow behind my ribs. Lord Cavan's words, perhaps your wolf is dead. The decision to walk, to strip the title and the cloak and the crown and see what remained. The 40 doors, the silence, and then her threshold and the stew and the oat cakes and the yarrow paste and the singing in the morning and the hand that caught my arm on the cliff path. My wolf has been quiet for 11 years, I said. He stirred for no one, not once. And then you held a bowl of salt broth to my mouth, and he lay down and closed his eyes, and he has not moved since. Do you understand what that means? I know what the old stories say it means. It means you are my fated mate, the one my wolf chose. The one my blood and my bones have been looking for since before I was king, since before I was anything. Myra's hands were at her sides. They were shaking, very slightly, the first time I had seen those steady hands unsteady. I'm a net mender, she said. I own one coat, I don't have a bloodline, I don't have a pack. I don't need you to have a bloodline. I need you to have exactly what you have, the heart that opens a door when every other door is shut. Soren, I am not asking you to decide now. I am not asking you to come to the hold. I am not asking you to be a queen or a Luna or anything you do not choose to be. I stepped back, so she had room, so she had air, so the choice was hers and no one could say otherwise. I am asking you to know what you are to me. And if you need a week or a month or a year to decide what I am to you, I will wait. I waited 11 years. I can wait more. She looked at me for a long time. The wind blew, the outriders knelt, the hamlet watched. Then Myra Lochran, who owned one coat and mended nets for scraps, said, "You should at least come inside. Your wound needs redressing." Dissa made a noise behind me. I turned and saw her face, and it was the face of a woman who had just understood something she would tell her grandchildren. "Stand up," I told my outriders, "and send word to Torin. Tell him the king is alive and well and will return to the hold in his own time." Dissa rose. "And if he asks where you are, tell him I'm at the door that opened." That night Myra redressed the wound on my face, no longer a disguise, just a cut that needed care, and we sat by the hearth, and I told her about Greymark. Not the kingdom, the pack, the wolves. "They're restless," I said. "They have been since my father died. A pack without a bonded alpha pair is a pack off balance. They sense the absence. The lead wolves pace the perimeter at night. The young ones fight more. The elders sleep less. And you think taking a mate will settle them? I think the bond will, the real one, the one my wolf chose." She was quiet, scratching the stray cat behind its torn ear. "I've never had a wolf," she said. "I never shifted. I assumed, everyone assumed, I was simply born without one. Or your wolf has been waiting." "For what?" "For the bond to wake her." She looked at me, and in the hearthlight her eyes were the color of the sea when the sun strikes it just before evening, gray with gold underneath. That's a convenient theory for a king who wants a mate. It's not a theory. It's what the old wolves say, that some wolves sleep inside their keeper until the bond calls them out. And if they're wrong, if I'm just a woman with no wolf and no bloodline and nothing to offer a king, then you're the woman who gave her last meal to a stranger, and that is worth more than any bloodline I have ever been offered. She did not answer, but she did not tell me to leave. I stayed. Torin arrived 2 days later, riding hard, with a face like a storm. He dismounted, saw me sitting on Myra's doorstep in a shepherd's coat with my face half bandaged, and for a moment I thought he might hit me. 11 days, he said. I said 3 weeks. You said 3 weeks, and I believed you for exactly none of them. The council is in an uproar. Lord Cavan is telling everyone you've abdicated. Lady Sorwin is already positioning her son as a replacement. Cavan can choke on his own tongue, and Sorwin can position all she likes. I haven't abdicated. Torin's gaze shifted to Myra, who had come to the door behind me. He was a beta, his instincts were sharp, if not as sharp as an alpha's. I saw the moment it registered. the way his nostrils flared, the slight widening of his eyes. "My lord," he said very carefully, "who is this?" "Myra Lochran, Annette Minder." "Annette Minder. And my fated mate." Torin was quiet for a long time. He looked at Myra. He looked at me. He looked at the stray cat which had come to wind around Myra's ankles. "Does she know?" he asked. "She knows. And she hasn't decided yet. And no one, not you, not Cavan, not the council, will pressure her." Torin studied Myra again. I could see him weighing what he saw, the patched coat, the calloused hands, the small cottage at the edge of the world. And I could see the moment he weighed something else, something beneath. The steadiness, the quiet composure, the fact that she was standing in her own doorway looking at the king's beta as if he were simply a man who needed to be offered tea. "Does she have tea?" Torin asked. Myra's mouth twitched. "I have salt broth and oat cakes. It's what I gave your king and he didn't complain." Torin sat down on the step, accepted a bowl of salt broth, and drank it without a word. I think he understood then, not just the bond, the quality, the unmistakable warmth of a woman who gives what she has to whoever is at her door, without calculation, without agenda, without the smallest expectation of return. He stayed the night, slept in the hay shed behind the cottage, refusing Myra's offer of the floor, which she made with the same calm generosity she offered everything. And in the morning he said, "I'll hold the council. Take the time you need. But the wolves, my lord, the wolves are getting worse." I knew, I could feel them, the pack's agitation, a low hum beneath my skin, the lead wolves pacing, the yearlings snarling. The bond between an alpha and his pack is not a metaphor. It is a living thread, and when the alpha is incomplete, the thread frays. "I'll come back soon," I said. Soon is a relative word for a man who disappeared for 11 days. "Torin." "My lord." "Thank you." He rode out at dawn, and Myra and I were alone again, and for 2 more days we lived in the quiet rhythm she had built, crab traps, mending, the hearth, the salt broth, the old cat purring between us. I helped where I could. I split her wood, repaired the worst of the sailcloth patches on her roof, carried the mended nets back to the fishing families, who now looked at me with a terror so thick I could smell it. They knew, of course they knew. Dissaz outriders had talked, or the hamlet's gossip had done what gossip does, and within a day every soul on the cliffside knew that the scarred stranger was the Alpha King, and that the odd Lochran woman, the one they tolerated, the one they left out of their suppers, the one whose nets they used but whose name they never called at their doors, was his fated mate. They began to come, one by one, with gifts, a jar of preserves, a basket of eggs, a shawl new unworn. Myra accepted each gift with the same quiet grace, and when the givers left, she set the offerings on the table and looked at them as if they were made of a substance she had never touched. "They didn't bring these because of me," she said. "No. They brought them because of you." "Yes." "Then they're your gifts, not mine." I looked at her. "Would you like to know a secret about ruling?" "I suspect you're going to tell me, whether I like it or not." "The gifts will keep coming, and in a month they'll forget they ever refused you, and they'll tell their children they always knew you were special. And the only honest thing any king can do is remember what they were like before they knew, and love them anyway, and make sure no one else is ever left standing outside their doors." Myra was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Is that what you did, walked 40 doors and let them all shut?" "Yes." "And you'll still be their king?" "They're still my people, tired people, frightened people." "But mine." Something shifted in her face, a softening, not of resolve but of the careful guard she wore like her patched coat. She had been watching me, I realized. Not just my words but my choices. The way I spoke to Dissaz without condescension. The way I treated Torin as a brother, not a subordinate. The way I split her wood without being asked and fixed her roof without making it a declaration. She had been testing me, the same way I had tested my kingdom. "Your wolf," she said, "the one who lay down, is he still quiet?" "Quieter than he's ever been." "Mine," she stopped. I waited. "I've never had a wolf," she said again, but this time the words sounded different, not a statement, a question. "Or she's been sleeping," I said, "waiting for the bond." Myra looked at her hands. Those capable, generous hands. "I feel something," she said, "since the path, since I caught your arm, a warmth here." She pressed her palm to her sternum, like a creature curling up. I could not breathe. "Is that normal?" she asked. "It's everything," I said. On the 10th day in Myra's cottage, the 17th since I had left the hold, I woke before dawn and felt something wrong. Not in the cottage, not in the bond, in the pack. The thread between me and Greymark's wolves had been humming for days, a low vibration of unease. Now it pulled taut, and I sat up, and my wolf who had lain quiet since the first night, rose inside me, not with violence but with a sharp, clear alertness. "They're coming." "Myra," I reached for her. She was on the floor by the hearth, wrapped in her patched coat, and she woke instantly, no groggy confusion, just eyes open, body ready. A woman who had lived alone long enough to know that waking fast could mean surviving. "What is it?" "The wolves." She heard it a moment later, the sound, distant but building, of many paws on stone, not running, walking. A deliberate, measured pace, dozens of bodies moving in formation through the dark. I pulled on my boots and opened the door. The cliff path was empty. The hamlet was dark, but from the inland track, the road that wound down from the high moors through the birch forest to the coast, I could hear them, feel them, the pack, not the outriders, not a scouting party. The wolves of Greymark, the bonded pack, the ones who ran the borders and guarded the hold and slept in the great hall at my father's feet, and then at mine. They were coming to Myra's door. I stepped out. The sky was still dark, stars scattered above the cliff, and the wind had died for once, as if the night itself were holding its breath. I stood on the threshold and watched. The first wolf appeared at the bend of the cliff path, a gray, massive, one of the lead border runners. Behind him another, and another. They came around the bend in a steady stream, silent, their eyes catching what little starlight there was, and they flowed down the path like water. I counted. I could not help it. I had lived with these wolves my whole life, and I knew their faces, their pelts, their scars. Bren, the old silver male who had been my father's shadow. Kava, the russet female who led the western patrol. The Ashenmere litter, 6 siblings, 3 years old, who had never once broken formation. They came and they came and they came. They did not come to me. They passed me, around me, beside me, a river of fur and warmth and the deep wild scent of the Greymark moors, and they went to the door, to the threshold where I had fallen, to the place where Myra Lochran had knelt and said, "Don't try to stand. Let me look at you." And there, one by one, they lay down. Bren first, the old silver. He walked to the doorstep, lowered his great head and folded himself to the stone, his nose pointed toward the cottage door. Kava beside him, the Ashenmere litter in a row. The border runners, the den mothers, the yearlings, the elders, every wolf in Greymark's bonded pack, 100 strong, lay down in the snow and the sea spray around Annette Mender's cottage and closed their eyes. Myra appeared in the doorway. She stood there in her patched coat with the stray cat at her ankle and looked out at 100 wolves covering the cliffside like a living blanket, and her hand went to her chest, to the place where she had said she felt a warmth curling, and she made a sound. Not a cry, not a gasp, a breath. The kind of breath a person takes when something they have waited for their whole life arrives, and they did not even know they were waiting. "They came for you," I said. "Why?" "Because you're theirs. And they've been looking for you, just as long as I have. One of the yearlings, a small gray female with a white blaze on her chest, barely a year old, lifted her head from the snow and looked at Myra with an expression I can only describe as recognition. Then she stood, walked to the doorstep, and pressed her nose against Myra's hand. Myra knelt. She knelt in the doorway of her own cottage, in her own patched coat, and the yearling climbed into her arms and licked her face, and Myra laughed, a real laugh, full and startled and bright, and the warmth that had been building behind my ribs for 10 days crested and broke. The bond. Not the slow simmer I had felt since the cliff path. The full bond, the true bond, the one the old wolves say happens only once in a lifetime and never by halves. It moved through me like light through glass, clean, total, everywhere, and I felt it bridge the space between us, felt it reach Myra and settle around her like a cloak, and I saw the moment she felt it too. Her eyes widened. Her hand went to her throat, and something under her skin, something that had been sleeping for 24 years, stirred. She did not shift. Not then. Perhaps not ever. It did not matter. What mattered was the wolf inside her, the wolf who had slept since birth, waiting for the bond to wake her, opened her eyes at last, and Myra gasped, and 100 wolves on the cliffside raised their heads and howled. Not at the moon, not at the stars, at her. A welcome, a recognition, a song that said, "We know you. We have always known you. We have been running your borders and guarding your threshold since before you were born, and now, at last, we are home." The hamlet woke. Doors opened. Faces appeared, the same faces that had closed their doors to a scarred stranger, the same families who had tolerated the odd Lochran woman but never invited her to supper. They stood in their nightclothes and looked at 100 wolves lying around a net mender's cottage like an honor guard around a queen. No one spoke. There are moments that do not allow for speech. This was one. I crossed the space between us and knelt beside her. The yearling was still in her arms, and Myra was still kneeling, and her face was wet. The tears of a woman who has been alone so long that the sudden arrival of belonging is almost unbearable. "Myra." She looked at me. "I told you I would wait, I meant it, but I need you to see what I see. 100 wolves, mine since birth, chose to lie down in the snow for you, not because I told them to, not because I led them here, because they knew, the way I knew, the way my wolf knew, the way your wolf, Myra, sleeping all these years, knew." "I feel her," Myra whispered. She's been there the whole time. I thought it was loneliness. I thought the ache was just being alone. It was her. Waiting. For this. For you to be found." She pressed her face into the yearling's fur and cried, and I put my hand on her shoulder. The first time I had touched her since the cliff path. The first time she had let me, and my wolf and hers, deep inside, lay down together, mirror images, and were still. We returned to the hold 3 days later. Not because Myra was ready. I am not sure Myra would ever have declared herself ready. She was the kind of woman who met every change the way she met the sea, by standing in it and letting it come. We returned because Torrhen sent word that Lord Cavan had called an assembly, and if the king did not appear, the council would vote on a regency. Myra packed her bag in 10 minutes, 1 coat, 1 change of dress, her mending kit. The stray cat in a basket. "You're bringing the cat," I said. He was at my door. I did not argue. We rode. I had sent for horses, and the wolves of Greymark ran alongside us, a river of gray and russet and silver flowing through the birch forest and across the moors. Myra rode well, which surprised me until I learned that she had spent her childhood in a farming village to the south before circumstances I did not yet know had driven her to the coast. She did not ride like a lady. She rode like a woman who understood the animal beneath her and did not waste its time. The hold appeared at midday. Greymark Seat, a great stone fortress on the high bluff above the river, its towers dark against a pale sky. Myra looked at it and said nothing. I watched her face. The The steadiness was still there, but beneath it something new, not fear, not ambition. A gathering. The way a mender gathers thread before beginning a stitch. The gates opened. The household guard lined along the inner courtyard stared. They had seen their king ride out in borrowed wool with no escort. He was returning with 100 wolves, a woman in a patched coat, and a cat in a basket. Torin met us in the courtyard. He took one look at the wolves, who had arranged themselves around Myra's horse in a formation so precise it looked rehearsed, and said, "The council is in the great hall." "Good. Cavan has 32 supporters. He'll have fewer in a moment." I helped Myra dismount. She landed lightly, the cat basket in one hand, and looked up at the Hold's stone face with an expression I will never forget. The expression of a woman who knows she does not belong here and is going to walk in anyway because the man she trusts asked her to. "Stay beside me," I said. "You don't have to speak, you don't have to bow, you don't have to be anything other than what you are. A net mender with a cat. The woman who opened the only door that mattered." The great hall of Greymark was built to intimidate. Vaulted stone, iron chandeliers, the banners of every lord who owed allegiance to the Ashvin line. Cavan and his supporters were seated on the left, a block of fur-collared arrogance. The loyalists, Torin's people, were on the right, fewer but steadier. The gallery above was packed with lesser lords, attendants, servants who had come to see whether their king still was one. I walked in with Myra at my side, and the stray cat weaving between our feet. The hall went quiet. Cavan rose. He was a tall man, silver-haired, with a face built for disapproval. He looked at Myra the way he might look at a stain on his boot. "My lord," he said, "the council has been waiting." "The council can continue waiting. I have something to say first. We have a matter of governance to." "Lord Cavan," I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The Alpha's voice, when it carries weight, does not need volume. It needs only truth. 11 days ago, you told me my wolf might be dead. The hall stirred. Cavan's jaw tightened. I took your words seriously. I stripped my rank, my name, and my crown, and I walked my own kingdom as a scarred stranger to see what heart remained in Greymark without the weight of a title. Silence. I knocked on 40 doors, 40. Lords' homes and merchants' halls and fishermen's cottages and tavern doors. I asked for water, for bread, for shelter, for the smallest kindness a soul can offer a stranger. I paused, let the silence do its work. 39 doors shut. The hall was very still now. I could see in the gallery the faces of people who knew or suspected that they were among the 39. The blacksmith Gedda's cousin, who had told the outriders where to find me. The tavern keeper from Cairnmouth, who was here because he supplied ale to the Hold. They had come to watch the spectacle, and now the spectacle was watching them. One door opened. One woman, a net mender who lives alone on the cliffside, who owns one coat and mends the nets your fishermen use because no one else's stitches hold in a storm, took in a scarred stranger, gave him her only meal, dressed his wounds, and asked nothing in return. Not his name, not his business, not a single thing. Myra stood beside me, quiet, her hands at her sides. The cat sat at her feet. And my wolf, the wolf you told me was dead. Lord Cavan opened his eyes for the first time in 11 years and lay down in peace, because he found his fated mate. The hall erupted. Not in cheers, not yet. In the confused, electric murmur of 100 people who have been told something that rearranges the world. I let it build, let it roll, and then I raised my hand. Last night 100 of Greymark's bonded wolves walked 20 miles from this hold to a cottage on the Ashenmere cliff and lay down in the snow around the woman who lives there. I did not send them. I did not lead them. They went because they knew. The bond is real. It is witnessed by every wolf in this pack. I turned to Myra. She looked at me, and her face was steady. that beautiful, unshakable steadiness that had held a bowl of broth to a stranger's mouth and asked nothing. "This is Myra Lochran," I said. "She is my fated mate. And I intend to ask her, before this hall and this council and every lord who pledged to Greymark, whether she will stand beside me, not because I require her to be queen, because I will not rule without the heart of the kingdom beside me, and she is its heart." I turned to face her fully. The hall was silent. "Myra, you told me you don't have a bloodline, a pack, or a wolf. And I told you that what you have, the door that opens, the meal given, the wound dressed, the steady hands, is worth more than anything a bloodline could offer. I believe that. I will always believe that. Will you stand beside me?" She looked at me. She looked at the hall, the lords, the banners, the iron chandeliers, the weight of a kingdom's gaze. She looked at Lord Cavan, who was staring at her with an expression that had traveled from contempt through confusion to something approaching dread. Then Myra Lochran, in her patched coat with a stray cat at her ankle, said, "I'll stand beside you, but I'm keeping the cat." The hall broke. The laughter came first, a warm, startled wave that swept the room, born of tension released. Then the wolves. The Greymark pack, who had followed us into the hold and been waiting in the courtyard, heard it or felt it through the bond, and the first howl rose, and then another, and then 100 voices joined, and the sound filled the great hall like a tide filling a harbor. Cavan sat down. He did not speak. His 32 supporters looked at one another, and one by one they looked away. In the gallery, a woman I did not know began to cry. Beside her, another. Not grief. Something older and kinder, the relief of seeing a story end the way stories are supposed to end, with the one who was overlooked being seen at last. Torrin stepped forward, unbuckled his gray cloak, the beta's cloak, the second finest in the hold, and draped it over Myra's shoulders. She looked up at him, surprised. "Welcome home," he said. I did not crown Myra that day. She would not have wanted it, and I would not have forced it. What I did was simpler. I walked her through the hold, room by room, and let her see the place that was now hers, not because I gave it to her, but because 100 wolves and a bond older than the kingdom had declared it. She stopped in the kitchen. It was a vast room, stone-floored, hung with copper pots and iron hooks, the hearth large enough to roast a deer. The kitchen staff, a dozen men and women who had fed the hold for years, looked up from their work and stared at the woman in the beta's cloak with a cat in her arms. Myra set the cat down. He walked to the hearth, sniffed the fire, and settled on the warm stone as if he had lived there always. "That's a kitchen cat now," said the head cook, a broad woman named Hesta, with the certainty of someone who has seen 1,000 cats choose their hearths. "What's his name?" "He doesn't have one," Myra said. "He was at my door." Hesta nodded, as if this were all the explanation required. "We'll call him Threshold, then." And just like that, Myra Lochran became part of Greymark. The crowning came later, a quiet ceremony, a month on, with the iron circlet and the words that have been spoken over every Luna since the first Ashvin took the bluff. Myra wore a dress that Hesta's daughter had sewn for her, deep gray, the color of the wolves. She did not look like a queen. She looked like Myra. And the hall, which had been full of noise for a month, gossip, speculation, the grinding adjustments of a court that had not expected a net mender, went quiet when she walked in, because steadiness commands a room more surely than spectacle. Cavan knelt. He did not want to. I could see it in the rigid set of his spine, the cost of the gesture. But 100 wolves were watching, and the bond was visible to anyone with eyes. The way my wolf and hers, both settled and bright behind our ribs, hummed in tune, and Cavan was many things, but he was not stupid enough to challenge a bond the pack itself had chosen. The hamlet came too, Gedda's cousin, the tavern keeper from Cairnmouth, the fishing families from the cliffside. They stood in the back of the hall and watched the woman they had overlooked receive the crown, and their faces were the complicated faces of people who are ashamed but cannot quite admit it. I did not punish them, I did not lecture. I simply made sure that every door in Greymark, every guest hall, every inn, every way station on the coastal road carried a new standing order, written on the stone in the old script. No traveler is turned from this door. Myra's rule. She was good at this, not at the ceremonies, which she endured the way she endured bad weather, with patience and a faintly skeptical expression, but at the substance beneath them. She understood me the way I understood boarders. She knew what it was to be cold, to be hungry, to be overlooked, and she carried that knowledge into every decision with a precision that startled even Torin. The grain stores were reorganized. The fishing families received fair prices, set by the crown, not by the merchants. The widows' pensions, a thing that had existed in theory but never in practice, became real. The cliff cottages were repaired, roofed properly, insulated. It was not glamorous work, and it did not make ballads, but it made a kingdom that did not slam its doors. And the wolves settled. I cannot overstate this. For 11 years the pack had been restless, a fraying thread, a humming tension that no border patrol or den mothering could ease. Within a month of the bond, the lead wolves stopped pacing. The yearlings stopped fighting. Old Bren, the silver who had been my father's shadow, slept through the night for the first time since Aldrich's death. Torin noticed. "It's her," he said one evening, watching Myra cross the courtyard with Threshold the cat on her shoulder and the white-blazed yearling at her heel. "The bond. The pack reads it, and it reads calm." "It reads home," I said. "Same thing." One night late in the first winter after the crowning, I came to our chamber and found Myra sitting at the window. The moonlight was on the snow, and the courtyard below was full of sleeping wolves, not 100 now but 30 or so, the ones who had decided that the Hold's inner yard was their preferred den. They had done this since the bonding. Wherever Myra slept, a ring of wolves arranged themselves nearby, not guarding, just near. She was mending something, of course she was. It was a child's glove, small, dropped by one of the kitchen staff's daughters. Myra had found it in the hall and picked it up the way she picked up everything that was lost, automatically, tenderly, without making a production of it. "Soren." "Hello." The wolf inside me, she's awake. I sat beside her, I know. She doesn't want to come out. She doesn't push or pace or try to shift me. She just lies there beside yours and watches through my eyes. That's enough. Is it? Myra, my wolf slept for 11 years and the kingdom held. Yours slept for 24, and now she's awake and the pack is calm, and the border wolves run with a purpose they haven't had in a decade. If she never shifts, she has already given more than any white Luna in a ballad. Myra finished the glove, tied the thread with her teeth, a habit I loved, impractical and entirely hers, and set it on the windowsill for morning. "You know what I keep thinking about," she said. "Tell me." "The broth, that first night, salt and seaweed and a heel of bread, the worst stew I've ever made, and you drank it like it was the finest thing you'd ever tasted." It was terrible, Soren. It was the finest thing I had ever tasted, because it was given by the only person in a kingdom of 30,000 who opened her door. She leaned her head against my shoulder, the wolves slept below, the cat purred on the bed. The wind came off the Ashenmere and pressed against the window, and inside the chamber it was warm and quiet and whole. That is the story, not of a king finding a queen, not of a crown placed on a worthy head, the story of a door that opened. In Greymark, every inn, every way station, every cottage that receives the crown's protection still carries the words in the old script above its threshold. Travelers tell me they read it and wonder who wrote it, what queen, what ancient decree, what war or famine prompted the law. I know, and I remember it not as a law but as a bowl of salt broth held to the mouth of a stranger by steady hands, in a cottage at the edge of the world, where the wind never stopped and the woman who lived there had nothing to give except everything. She still mends things. Not nets, though she could, and sometimes does when the kitchen staff bring her a torn cloth and she reaches for the needle before anyone else. She mends the gaps, the overlooked places, the people who fall between the stones. And at the cottage on the cliff we keep it, Myra insists, though we visit only in summer, there is a bowl set on the doorstep every evening. Fresh stew, not broth, good bread, a clean cloth over the top, for any stranger who might need it. Beside it every night lies a wolf.